very much. Good morning to everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
That's better. Thank you very much. As already introduced, my name is Leya Mtonga Ngoma. I am here as a corporate governance expert, and today I'm going to speak to you about the fundamentals of corporate governance for small to medium enterprises. Just by a show of hands, who is an entrepreneur in here? Aspiring an entrepreneur? Very good. Thank you. So I'm speaking to entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, students from the university, and I want to believe other occupations. Roderick, are you going to help me with the moving the slides? Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. The next slide is basically my qualifications. I won't go deep into them because I think I've been introduced, but just to mention that I'm a certified professional in corporate governance and ethics, and I'm also a certified stockbroking and investment advisor. The qualification I have from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is called Legal Tech in the Digital Era. So it's got a lot to do with bringing lawyers to speed with the advent of technology. Next slide, please. So what is an entrepreneur? Do we know what an entrepreneur is? Do you know what you are? Those who raise their hands as entrepreneurs. Do you know what you are? You know who you or what you are. Can anybody volunteer without looking at the screen? I'm the only one who's allowed to look at the screen right now. An entrepreneur is an individual who identifies, creates, and exploits opportunities by launching and managing new ventures, often characterized by innovation, risk-taking, and proactivity. Entrepreneurs are driven by the goal of transforming ideas into profitable enterprises. Is that what you describe yourselves as? So I'd like you to just identify some punch words in this definition. There's the word innovation, risk-taking, proactivity, and transformation of ideas into profitable enterprises. I'm sure all of us would like to make some money, even a lot of money, like Elon Musk. Who would like to be like Elon Musk? Why? Because he has a lot of money. And any other reason? Innovative. Do you think he takes risks? A lot of risks. Like acquiring Twitter. Was that a risk? Why? I'm told he got a bit of backlash for acquiring Twitter and changing a lot of things. But yes, even I'd like to be like Elon Musk. Some parts of Elon Musk, not all the parts. Like the many children he has, I'm not really interested in that. Next slide, please. The key characteristics of an entrepreneur: innovation, risk-taking, visionary. I'll stop here or pause here for a while. An entrepreneur is expected to be visionary. What is a vision? What is a vision? What is a vision statement? I'm sure you've seen a vision statement and a mission statement in a lot of institutions, isn't it? They have this poster which says our vision and our mission. Do we understand the difference? So your vision is what you'd like to be in the future. And your mission is how you're going to get to where you would like to be. And so an entrepreneur must be visionary. You must be able to be forward-looking and visualize what you would like to be. Otherwise, then you're wasting your time. Not so. Leadership. An entrepreneur is somebody who should be able to lead. Why? Because they're a vision carrier, isn't it? You have your small business and you know where you want to get it. But you have to work with people, isn't it? So you're going to have to lead people, influence their behavior towards your vision. Flexibility. When you have a vision, sometimes there's a tendency of you being too focused on the vision. And you don't want to listen to anybody else because the vision is yours, isn't it? And you feel as though you're the best person to explain the vision or even to execute it. But you have to be flexible. You bring in people in your team for different reasons and different skills, isn't it? I may be a lawyer, but I need an accountant. And so I must be flexible to be able to tolerate or even understand or bring on board what the accountant is proposing for my business. Next slide, please. The definition of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the process of designing, launching, and running a new business, which typically begins as a small venture and evolves through various growth stages. It involves identifying market opportunities, developing business models, securing resources, and bearing risks with the aim of achieving profit and growth. Do we agree with this? So as an entrepreneur, do you envisage yourself growing beyond being a small to medium enterprise? That's your vision, isn't it? So entrepreneurship is not just for SMEs. It's even for large corporations like Microsoft. I think the proprietors of Microsoft are still described as entrepreneurs, isn't it? But their businesses are huge. And so you start small because you've been innovative, you have an idea which you need to grow, and you want to see it as a large corporation, hopefully. Identifying market opportunities. As an entrepreneur, how did you decide that you want to go into a certain market? You saw an opportunity, isn't it? You saw an opportunity in terms of people needing to eat lunch at 1 o'clock, and you decide to put up a burger joint or something because you've seen the market. And maybe you go to the industrial area where there are a lot of people who don't have time to cook but need something to eat. Securing resources, capital, isn't it? You need capital to be able to attain or achieve your vision. Not so. Most of the time, you need resources. And resources is not just capital. It's also expertise, assets and things like that. Bearing risks. So I think in every market, there are opportunities, but there are also risks, isn't it? And so you need to have a plan on how you're going to mitigate or avoid those risks. And what that is called is risk management. And at the end of the day, you want to make a profit, isn't it? When you look at what you've put in and you look at your expenses, what is remaining as a surplus would be your profit, and there should be enough to put back into the business so that it continues to grow. Next slide, please. Key elements of entrepreneurship. Opportunity recognition, I have spoken about that. Identifying unmet needs or market gaps. I think opportunity is about seizing something, isn't it? You seize the opportunity because you have seen unmet needs or you have seen gaps that can be addressed by your innovative solutions. Business planning, this is very important. You have to plan your business. How are you going to utilize the capital that you have so that you can be able to run a business as a going concern? Next slide, please. Resource mobilization, we have spoken about that. Execution, implementing the business plan. That's where things like teams come in. How are you going to implement this dream of yours? What do you need to be able to achieve your vision? Adaptation and growth. We've spoken about growth. Just to comment on adaptation. Adaptation is finding a way to exist with changes in your environment. Rather than cowing down and saying, there's too much of this, I can't do business, you should be able to rise to the occasion and adapt to the situation and continue to be innovative. Next slide, please. I'd like to illustrate by way of a story so that we can have some context in terms of where we are going with the presentation. So this is a short story about a young lady who from a very young age seemed to always know what she wanted in her life. And she developed a sense of fashion at a very young age. And so she was very selective, even with gifts of clothes and things like that. She was able to say, oh, this doesn't work for me, and things like that. So when she was in 10th grade, she did a vision board. Do you know what a vision board is? We know what a vision board is. So it's a piece of paper, or usually they use cardboard and put pictures and things like that. But it's a futuristic story. It's you speaking to yourself about where you want to be. So she did a vision board in the 10th grade. And like I said, she's always known what she wants to be. And in her vision board, she wanted to study cosmetics and beauty therapy. And she started off with making things at home, products at home, and going to sell them to her colleagues. She took time to understand the skin and hair needs of her colleagues. And because she was the same age as her colleagues, she was able to relate and provide products which she thought her colleagues would like. And so her parents gave her some money to buy the raw materials, but there were very strict rules around that venture. So her teachers were involved and were collecting all the money and sending the money to her parents, who were putting it away for her. And so she was making natural soaps, scrubs, lotions, and so on, and selling them out to her colleagues. Next slide, please. And so on her graduation day, Apart from graduating, she did a little business on the side, managed to hire one of her colleagues to be her assistant, and she did makeup for her colleagues at a fee. When she came home, after high school, her parents gave her the money with a little interest, and she went and bought some equipment for her to use for her passion at the time. She went ahead and opened an Instagram page and suddenly was getting bookings to do makeup for people. And her parents supported her by reserving a room at home where she set up her little business. Next slide, please. So during her gap year, this young lady became a little bit anxious because her vision board was saying she would go to a very renowned beauty school, and that cost a lot of money, isn't it? It required her to travel, and it required that her parents were able to support. And so she became anxious, faced with the possibility that perhaps she won't go to this institution. And she decided to do a local training in professional baking. And according to her, she was diversifying her business, but also relating what she was doing to her vision. And she thought that her clients wouldn't mind having a slice of cake at a fee at her spa. So when it came to discussing her further education, she pulled out her vision board and made a case to her parents. I need to do this. And her parents luckily agreed, and she is now at that same institution studying, and she works part-time to get that much needed experience, and hoping that she'll come back and set up on her own and have those high standards. So this young lady is actually my daughter, and she's a very feisty individual, always knowing what she wants in life. And I think because she's always had to justify why she wants to do something, she's become very good at explaining her vision and where she wants to be. But I would like you to ask yourself a question. Is this young lady an entrepreneur? From her experience so far. And for us to bear this story in mind as we now begin the actual presentation. So what I was talking to you about is being an entrepreneur, what entrepreneurship is, and I've given you an illustration. So next slide, please. So the outline of our program is that we'll look at an overview of corporate governance. We'll look at structures of corporate governance, regulatory framework of corporate governance, internal controls and systems, external audit, financial reporting, strategic planning and evaluation. We'll look at a board of governors and corporate governance for small to medium enterprises. As I put a question mark because I've been asked a lot of questions about whether corporate governance applies to small businesses. Who has that question? Okay, a few of us have that question. And we'll look at the impact of the fourth industrial revolution on corporate governance. And then we'll look at some stress management. Who has stress in their business? I'll be surprised because there are so many reasons for you to be stressed in your businesses right now. And we'll learn how to manage stress, and that will be the end of the presentation. ready for Q&A. The definition of corporate governance. I've selected a definition from the Cadbury Report on Corporate Governance, and it's defined as the process in which organizations are managed and controlled. Do you agree? So what's the difference between managing and controlling? Where is there more power? In controlling, yeah. We've got a very clever crowd here. So in considering the context of corporate governance best practice, it's proposed that a holistic approach be taken where the organization, its internal and external environment, and factors are seen as relations to one another. So corporate governance is something that should be taken holistically. And those who have read my profile will see that I'm also passionate about organizational behavior. I don't believe that corporate governance and organizational behavior can be seen separately. They work together. They are married, because corporate governance is about the structures and the processes, isn't it? You have your board, you have your management and all that, but then in those structures there are people, and that's the behavior part of it. The people, the corporate actors. Next slide, please. In terms of the sources of corporate governance, we'll look at Zambia in particular. So we have legislation, which are the laws. We have legal precedent. Those of you who are studying law, legal precedent is law that is made through judgments. So you refer to judgments of the court to be able to explain some legal issues. Corporate governance best practice. So there's an African code of governance. I'm sure you have heard about the King's Code of Corporate Governance. Anybody? No? Professor Marvin King, yes. So Professor Marvin King is a South African national, and he founded the King's Committee on Corporate Governance for the Republic of South Africa. But the code is very famous because it has international acclaim. And Zambia uses the King's Code in terms of where to get corporate governance best practice. Constitutional instruments, these are documents or instruments that a company would use, like articles of association. We are aware of those. Who's got a company? Who has established a company? Okay, so you must know what articles of association are. Okay, in certain societies, they have what is called a constitution of the society. Those are constitutional instruments. Professional rules, practice, and ethical standards. So in an organization, you have lawyers, like I am a lawyer working for IDC, but they're accountants, isn't it, at IDC? They're also investment professionals, and they have rules that govern their practice. And those are also part of the regulatory framework in corporate governance. In terms of the factors affecting the practice of corporate governance, most corporates, or should I say all corporates, have a personality. Your company is separate from you. It's also a person, isn't it? I'm sure you've seen cases, so-and-so versus X Limited. It's that company that is being sued. And at law, it is considered as a person, except that it's not a natural person. It is a juristic person, and it acts through natural people. And bringing the corporate to life, this is why I was saying you can have structures, but if there are no people, then the company will not be able to live. And so if there are no people, if there's no money for the operations, if there's no investment into the business, then it will not be alive. The health and growth of the corporate, we've spoken about what are your plans for your business, isn't it? How do you intend to grow it? But as you are growing it, you will be constantly checking on how healthy it is. Are you breaking even? Are you making a profit? Okay. The rights and liabilities of the shareholders of the company. So you're a shareholder, what are your rights? You're entitled to a dividend if one is declared. That's your return on your investment into the company. And there are certain liabilities that you have as shareholders. So who has a limited liability company? Somebody has a company here. Is it called X Limited? Yes? Yes. So what does the limited mean? That your liability, yes, towards the company is limited to what is unpaid on your shares. So sometimes you will be allocated 200 shares and you pay for 100 and the other 100 is payable later. When the company is in trouble, it can make a call on the shares. And your liability towards, for example, the 10 million that the company is owing will be limited to what you have not paid on your shares. That's what it means. And it's also a demonstration that the shareholders and the company are two separate people. Okay, so we have, technology issues. Related to what I've just spoken about, there's what is called the veil of incorporation. This is the protection that the shareholder has against liabilities in excess of what is unpaid on the shares. Then you have your governing body, which is your the structures. Okay, so you have the shareholders who are the investors, but they're also a structure. Then the investors devolve power to manage the company to a board of directors, which delegates to executive management. I'm sure you're aware of that. So you have a board, you have your CEO, isn't it? I'm sure those of you with small enterprises call yourself CEO and founder, isn't it? I've seen a lot of that on LinkedIn, okay? And what these structures do. So the control sits with the shareholders. Remember we had said corporate governance is about management and control, isn't it? So the control sits with the shareholders and the management sits with the board, who delegates it to executive management. And then you have the other structures under the management. Next slide, please. So here I'm just going to quickly speak about the theories of corporate governance. So there are two theories of corporate governance. There's the agency theory and there's the stakeholder theory. So the agency theory is the older of the two theories, and it advocates that the board, remember I had said that the board is given power by the shareholders to manage the company. So this theory advocates that the board is an agent of the shareholder and does what the shareholder wants. That's the agency theory. It's like, you want Yango to bring a package to you, isn't it? You're the principal, they're the agent. and they will, deliver the package on your behalf in accordance with your instructions, isn't it? So that's the agency theory. Then there is the stakeholder theory, which advocates, if we can go to the next slide, that for a company to succeed, it must take into consideration the interests of its various stakeholders. So what are stakeholders? These are institutions or individuals that have an interest in the organization and may not necessarily be shareholders. So under this theory, the shareholder is but one of the stakeholders. So there are internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So the internal stakeholders are your employees. Those are internal stakeholders. The board is also an internal stakeholder, and so is the shareholder because of the organizational structure. The regulator, the government, those are external, isn't it? So if you do your business outside the law, someone from the regulator will come for you. And because they're interested in you doing your business in accordance with the law, they will be interested in how you're doing your business. Your bankers, so if you're going to get a loan for your business, your bankers are interested. Those of you that have obtained loans from the banks, I think the bank will ask you, so how are you going to pay back? And then you say, oh, okay, this is what I intend to bring in, this is what the cash flows look like, and then they advance you the money, but they don't stop there. They're interested in knowing whether you have used the money for that purpose and that you'll make enough money to repay the loan. Next slide, please. Structures of corporate governance. We will just cruise through this. I've spoken about the structure of an organization. And it's important for us to bear in mind that the structures are seen from an internal and external perspective. And the external perspective relates to the political, social, technological, environmental, and legal framework. So that's the external aspect. Remember, I had asked who is stressed? We've got environmental issues in this country, isn't it? We've had a drought, that's environmental, and it has affected businesses. And so that is the external perspective. Next slide, please. We have already spoken about in terms of the framework, but we will now look at the internal control processes, external audit, and financial reporting a little later on. So we have spoken about regulation, but at this point, just to give you the broad categories. So there is mandatory regulation, which is the law, isn't it, that you have to follow if you're doing your business. Then there is self-regulation and voluntary regulation. I've spoken about the King's Code. In Zambia, it's voluntary, so it's not part of the legal framework. But if you want to practice in the best way possible, you will adopt some of the recommendations in the King's Code. The self-regulation is things like articles of association, policies of your organization. That's what the rules that you make for yourselves. Next slide, please. Internal controls and systems. Internal controls are defined as the procedures or practices within an organization that help the organization to achieve its targets. So within your business, Who is checking on whether you are following the processes that you have put in place? Those are internal controls. So before you make a payment, what do? You get a quotation, you get some kind of approval, and then you proceed to draw a check, isn't it? Or make the payment online. All those are controls so that you're not using the money for a purpose other than what it is intended for. Internal systems is the collective of all those instruments of control. Next slide, please. Next slide. External audit. I'm moving very quickly because of the time. So an external audit is an exercise where an external auditor comes in to review your books of accounts. So you will need someone to provide an opinion of the financial affairs of your organization. And in a company, the external auditors will provide this opinion to the board to own, and then go to report to the owners of the company, the shareholders, about their performance. So I'm sure we know what financial statements are, management accounts. So the management will prepare the statements, and the external auditors will provide an opinion as to whether those accounts are in order, and their international standards of reporting. I'm sure you've heard about IFRS standards. Those are the standards that the external auditors would check for. In terms of opinions, there are a number of opinions that the external auditor can give. So the best opinion is an unqualified opinion, meaning that everything is in order. What management is saying on the papers is what is actually going on in the company. Then there's a qualified opinion, which is not as good because it emphasizes certain matters that require attention. Then there's what is called a disclaimed opinion, which I think is something you don't want to have, because the auditors are saying you haven't given them enough information to be able to provide an opinion. And the external auditors are supposed to be independent, so they come from outside the company. Next slide, please. I have already spoken about the responsibility of the board for preparing the financial statements. Remember, I'd spoken about delegation. So it delegates to management, and management does this work and takes it to the board, and it goes up. Next slide, please. Financial reporting. So this is related to external audit, but it is what happens internally. So the external auditors don't prepare the financial statements. The financial statements are prepared by management. And the definition is the disclosure of financial results and related information to management and external stakeholders, including investors of a company, as a going concern over a specific period of time. So usually the financial reporting will be over a 1-year period. According to the company law, every year a company is supposed to produce financial statements. The punch there is that this document will inform stakeholders. For example, the shareholders want to know what the financial health of the organization is, because if it's not doing well and they're getting agitated, maybe they want to sell their shares. But they can only be informed by a report with disclosure such as this. Next slide, please. I've spoken about the standards, the international standards, but also here just to speak about an integrated report. This is the modern way of reporting, where we report more than just the numbers, okay? I'm sure you've seen financial statements or old financial statements, just black and white, figures, tables, and so on. But now the reporting has evolved, and you would include issues of strategy, governance, and even CSR, which is corporate social responsibility. So there's more information that is given to stakeholders in the integrated reporting method. Next slide, please. Strategic planning. What is strategic planning? What is a strategy? How you're going to achieve your vision. You strategize, isn't it? Today I'm going to do this. Next month I'm going to do this. In 6 months I'm going to do this. That's strategy. So before you go out and implement, you must have a plan. As an entrepreneur, you must have a plan. Like this young lady, to posture for capital, to posture for further education. How is she going to do that? Strategize, catch my mom when she's in a bad mood or a good mood, so that she can give me the money and things like that. So that is a simple definition of strategy. But in a company, strategic planning is the documenting and establishment of direction for a business. That's the formal definition. A company should assess where it is. Remember, we had spoken about you looking for opportunities, unmet needs, gaps, and things like that. You should be able to assess where you are. Where are you? Where would you like to be? How are you going to do it? And what are your values? So there are ethical ways of doing your business and unethical ways of doing your business. But in planning, you must identify what your values are, what your core values are. Competence, would it be a value for you? Transparency, diligence. So you have to identify what are we about? What is our work ethic? What will help us to get to where we would like to be? So the responsibility for a strategic plan lies with the board in a company. So management will do all the groundwork, but the strategic plan will be approved by the board, and that's the document that the board will use to oversee what management is doing. This is the plan. What is your report? Why haven't you done this? According to the strategic plan, you're supposed to be here. That's the document that they use. Next slide, please. Board of Governors, Board of Directors. So as an organization, you have a board of directors. What do these people do? They direct. Remember the definition of corporate governance? Management and control. So in terms of management, there's direction, they resolve and guide management. So this is what the board of directors do. Companies should have a balanced board. People who can properly direct management, isn't it? Especially in a professional environment. You need somebody who understands numbers on your board, isn't it? You need somebody who understands the business. You need somebody who understands human relations or human capital. So best practice is that your board should be balanced with the necessary skills that are required for someone to be able to make these big decisions, or the group to be able to make these big decisions. Decision making should take into account principles of accountability, transparency, responsibility, and what is in the best interest of the company. So this group called the Board of Directors doesn't just make decisions willy-nilly like that, okay? So they are supposed to incorporate certain ethical practices to be able to arrive at decisions. And the way that they arrive at decisions is usually established as well. So you'll find that the Articles of Association say that decisions will be made by majority, isn't it? So you can be 7 of you. If one of you has an issue with the decision and the other 6 are okay with it, then the board has made a decision, notwithstanding that one person has dissented. Then there are other structures. For example, the biggest shareholder will appoint some directors and can also insist on certain things. Like, for example, a quorum cannot be formed if there's no representative from this shareholder. This is all in an effort to protect interests. Remember I had said stakeholders? So the shareholders have an interest in the company. And one of the things they do is they have authority to appoint who is going to manage the organization on their behalf. So to be a director, there are certain questions you need to ask yourself. Do you understand corporate governance like you will understand or you're understanding? Next slide, please. Do you understand the company's strategy? Do you understand the process of decision making? Do you understand the adage, nose in, fingers out? No? I've said the board makes decisions, but doesn't implement them. And so it's nosy about what's happening with their decision, but it doesn't do the running around. So the fingers out is stay out of the operations, make the decisions. There's a separation between the board and management. Do you know what your C-suite looks like? I've been introduced as chief of something, isn't it? C-suite means chief suite. That is the executive arm of management, the senior executives. Do you know what they're about? Do you know what they're supposed to be doing in the organization and what their structure is? In terms of ethical considerations, I'll just tell you one thing. I'm sure you'll be availed these slides. So ethics has one golden rule. Treat others the way you would like to be treated. So the fact that you are the CEO and founder of your organization doesn't mean that you treat people with disrespect because they're not the owners. That's unethical behavior. There are a lot of principles of ethical behavior, but I'm sure with reading these slides, you'll be able to read a little bit more about it. Next slide. Corporate governance for small to medium enterprises, which is what we are predominantly. Is there corporate governance for SMEs? I think a lot of people ask those questions. I'm too small to have a board. You know, you're putting, these are expenses. I have to pay these people. But you have incorporated a company which is established under a piece of legislation which requires you to have a board. But it's given you a minimum, 2 directors, that's your board. You start to increase with capacity. So yes, SMEs still have to oblige. You still need a structure that is called a board. You have shareholders. I have a little business with my husband. We are shareholders. We are also directors. And I'm also the company secretary. Because the law allows me to do that. And I just wanted to demonstrate to you that you can be small, but you can still comply with corporate governance requirements. We've spoken about this, having a strong and independent board, the right mix, and people who are ethical, and that there should be clear roles. Remember, I said nose in, fingers out. And the same thing applies to shareholders, except the shareholders are a little bit special. They can actually interfere in certain ways because they're allowed to. There are certain powers they keep to themselves in order to protect their interests. For example, if you want to dispose of a major asset in the company, as a board of directors, you need authority from the shareholders. Next slide, please. So these are things we have already spoken about. And just for you to refer yourself to the illustration that I gave, it's always good to relate these concepts to some story. It's easier to understand. So always bear that in mind. Next slide, please. I've spoken about regulatory compliance, engaging stakeholders actively. Maybe what I can say here is that according to the stakeholder theory, you are supposed to manage your stakeholders, make sure that you have enough money to pay off that loan every month. Okay, make sure you are complying with the law, and where there are difficulties, find a way of engaging your stakeholders so that you can manage the risk. Strategic planning, you're also expected to do that at whatever level. Doesn't have to be in a big, glossy, shiny document which you'll pay thousands of kwacha to get printed. My strategic plan for my brand is not even printed. It's a soft copy. 3 pages of what I'd like to do in the next 5 years. And every year I beef up whatever that thing I'm supposed to do in that year. Continuous improvement, like you're doing now, you're learning. I am always learning. And so continuous development is very important. Trends change, and so there's need for you to refresh yourselves. And in your company, have a program for continuous development at whatever level. It can be small. It can be about getting your team to understand your product and teach them in that regard. Leveraging on technology. We'll look at this a little bit in more detail, but you are not excused from the fourth industrial revolution. We are aware of 4IR. We are. Millennia. I've seen a lot of millennia in here. You work on your phones. Everything is on your phone. It's because of the fourth industrial revolution, the advent of technology. And so even in business, we cannot ignore technology. Who has Airtel money? Who uses Airtel money? Mobile money. All of you use it, isn't it? Who has online banking? Yeah, that's technology. All of that is sitting on a bed of technology. And next slide, please. This era is here to stay. And the difference between the other revolutions and this one is that the growth is exponential. Something happens in the UK in terms of technology. The same minute, you in Zambia can use it. And somebody in Zambia is developing something based on that. So it's not going anywhere. And we have to structure our businesses to adapt. Remember, I'd spoken about adaptability. So whereas you had all these reports in bunches of paper and all of that, everything is sitting in some file on your PC, and maybe there's a disaster recovery site as well. For example, for board meetings, I don't print all those board packs for every member anymore. I have an online board meeting portal. So everything is done online. I keep my hard copy because that's my duty. I need to keep a hard copy to manage the risk. If my computer crashes and everybody's computer crashes, at least I have a hard copy, so I'm managing my risk. But the point I am making here is that technology is here to stay, and you should embrace it and use it in your businesses. No point in walking to a booth when you can get the app. No point in walking to the bank when you can actually do online banking. Only go to the bank when you think they've stolen your money and you have to make a lot of noise. Next slide, please. So from this perspective of corporate governance, in 2025, it's predicted that America will have its first artificially intelligent board member. Did you know that? So you'll be talking to a machine in the board meeting. And so here I have just highlighted the kinds of technology. So there's blockchain, smart contracts and things like that. And the value is in the data. Data is king, you've heard about that. Processing of data is big business now. But what it has done is that, for example, for lawyers, we now cannot bill for some services because they're in the blockchain, and our clients can interface with that system. And so we have to think of other ways. We have to be innovative with our product ranges. Even the rate at which business is going, lawyers don't now have that luxury of taking X minutes. Minutes are reduced, so you need technology to help you. Next slide, please. Stress management. It's a very short slide. Next slide. Everyone deals with stress at some point, and no person is immune from stress, okay, and the pitfalls of life. So just in case you thought you were the only one, everybody has stress, okay, because we exist in an environment that we may not even have control. Stress tends to exhibit when we are tired, when we are sick. Sometimes you can get sick because we are stressed. One of the ways of managing stress is to effectively plan. We've spoken about strategic planning, isn't it? Plan so that you can even identify the risk. There's a risk that I'll get stressed if I go at this speed. So maybe I should plan for a little holiday in between. That's how you manage stress. And taking on too much. And usually that is a sign of failure to plan and not knowing your team or your capacity. So when you take on too much, you become stressed. And even the thing that you are able to do properly, you will not be able to do because you'll be sick or tired. One of the other ways of managing stress is you need to add quality to your time. Okay? What you like to do to relax. Make time for it and have a value around it so that when you are done with that activity, you are rejuvenated. You think more clearly when you allow yourself to relax. I think the next slide is the end. The next slide must be the end. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I hope I haven't taken more than 40 minutes. Thank you.
So Leya, can you hear me? I'm audible, okay. Thank you so much for that presentation. I found we were expecting some good value from you, but I think you've actually exceeded the expectations here. This is what we have experienced here is years and years and years of experience given to us in a crash course kind of format. So thank you, Leya, for your presentation, your time and your preparation and your delivery. Very methodical. I love the pace of your presentation as well. It allowed us to follow you on as you were presenting. Please, we'll take some questions now, guys. I'll let Leya, as you see the hands, feel free to point at who you'd like to ask the questions. We can now deliver some questions to the speaker.
Thank you. I think
So kindly just start with your name. So just give us your full name and then your question.
Sure, thanks. My name is Ken, and I think under 15 minutes, I'll start by just appreciating. When I hit corporate Shansha, I was expecting a lot of jargon, but I think the presentation has been very easy to understand and easy to follow. Thank you so much. My question is just around the interest on implementing corporate governance in SMEs. And I feel there still need to be conversation in that. Using the example that you gave us, the story. My question is this: how does corporate governance come in play in an SME when most SMEs are not limited companies but are sole trader kind of businesses? By sole trader, I mean you are the founder, you are the CEO, you are the accountant, you are the director, you are the media, because everything is centered on you. And of course, you don't have the resources to be able to expand. And it will take a bit of time for you to grow those. So how really, in reality, we have a lot of SMEs in Zambia where Bamake Roderick is running, selling fritters, and she's managing the business. She's able to pay school fees, but she doesn't have corporate governance. So corporate governance is very formal, but SMEs are very informal. How do we marry it? Thank you.
Thank you. Should I answer this question?
Let's take them one at a time.
Okay. So thank you very much, Ken, for your question. I'll begin by perhaps highlighting that in our economy or in any economy, there's what is called a formal sector and an informal sector. So Amake Roderick is in the informal sector from what you have described. For SMEs, when you say you're a sole trader, what does that mean? You're alone. Your liability is you, isn't it? But there is a framework under which you are supposed to be operating. So there's what is called the Business Registration of Business Names Act. That's where sole traders are sitting and their requirements under there. So when we speak about corporate governance, you're correct. It's for corporates. And corporates are companies and other bigger organizations. The issue here is about the principles of governance. So we say corporate governance for SMEs because we think that SMEs can be limited companies, starting small with the view of getting bigger. So entrepreneurs don't plan to stay as SMEs. SME is just your stepping stone and your vision is for growth. So there are requirements for a sole trader. You are allowed to be the CEO, the accountant, and all those things. But bear in mind the principles. So yes, you can be the accountant for your business, but you will be the internal control. You will need help with external audit. And you can get a firm, you can get a person. So it's all about cutting your cloth according to, or what do you say? Cutting your design, whatever, according to the cloth that you have. You cannot plan or you cannot make a big dress from 1 meter of material. So your question is very good. And I think the issue is, how do I start as a sole proprietor, knowing that I have a vision to get bigger? As we speak, I am the CEO. I'm also the director. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But having in mind, getting the education that as you grow, you will need these structures. That's what we're discussing today. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Next question. Thinking about their questions, please, there's a hand at the back.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Ms. Ngoma. So with regards to corporate governance, I think one of the most contentious aspects of the topic is the relationship between the shareholders and the directors. And we have the Companies Act that designates the powers of the directors and the shareholders. And then under Zambian law, we have judicial decisions that speak to that aspect, saying that the shareholders have the overriding authority over the directors, and that the directors are supposed to dance to the tune of the shareholders. I think I saw a slide that talks about the establishment of clear roles and responsibilities. And with respect to the judicial cases that I've mentioned, what are the dangers of subjecting the powers of the directors to the powers of the shareholders when the Act actually says directors can do this and this with respect to the Act and the Articles of Association?
Thank you very much. I didn't get your name. Sunge. Thank you for your question. I think the case that you're referring to is Kasengele versus Zimco. It's an old case, and it has highlighted the agency theory, which I've been speaking to. And I had mentioned that the agency theory is the older of the two. If once you get the slide, you will see that the stakeholder theory came as a result of what is called the agency problem. There now was a problem with that theory, precisely because of what you have said. And so when you look at the Companies Act, the Zambian Companies Act, you will find fiduciary duties of the board of directors. And one of their duties is to promote the success of the company, act in the best interest of the company. And so with time, there has been a lot of debate around the law that was settled in the Kasengele matter because of what is happening in the corporate governance space, where best practice is saying there should be this separation. Remember, I had spoken about stakeholder interests. Am I going to give you my $1 million to use as you please, just because you're a board who I have appointed and can disappoint? So the issue here is about the dynamics. Where is the control sitting? With the shareholder, isn't it? So the shareholder can devolve that power, but it can also withdraw it. So what is important is for us to recognize our roles. Just like power, absolute power, they say corrupts, isn't it? So governance has taken into consideration those things, and there are checks and balances, but there's also a recognition of interest. My hard-earned $1 million should be given to a board to use as they please, maybe even outside the strategic plan, and they claim that it's in the best interest of the company. What are the options? Even within Kasengele, what are the options? I can change the articles as a shareholder, isn't it? Because that's my instrument. I can reserve some powers. Remember I had said the shareholders reserve some powers to themselves? Is to address some of those issues. This is my money. I am vested in this money. That's why I'm the one who appoints the board, and I'm also the one that disappoints. What's important is appreciation of the best practice. And I think as you go along, you will see that whereas best practice may not be mandatory, it may be the difference between your company getting the much needed investment. Because shareholders now are very careful. Is there good governance in this company? Why would I put my money in an organization that has no financial acumen? And so you can get away with saying we don't have these systems, but the next company will get investment because they have good structures and things like that, and you won't. So I hope I have answered your question. Again, it's a very good question. Thank you. Please, lady.
Thank you so much. My name is Gertrude Lungu. So my question really is, I'd like clarity on what the benefits of incorporating corporate governance, especially for small businesses, given the fact that the status quo is okay, and then incorporating corporate governance will require extra work and extra resources. So what are the benefits, especially short-term ones? Because for long-term benefits, they're quite clear, because once you grow, all these things are necessary. But then for short-term benefits for incorporating corporate governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. Okay. So you've spoken about short-term benefits, then there are medium-term benefits and long-term benefits. Then there's your vision. So your vision is part of the long-term, isn't it? And whatever it is that you're doing, even in the short term, should relate to your medium term and long term. So in the long term, you expect to have a big establishment with all these departments and accountants and things like that. But you must start from somewhere. So you can't wish yourself to the long term. You've got to do something about it. That's why you make short-term plans. So what are your short-term plans? I don't have the money to hire a big firm, but I have a little money to hire one person to look at my books. That's what I'll do in the short term. And in the medium term, maybe I'll be better. So every business should be founded on transparency, all those ethical issues. Those are governance issues. Founded, like I said. You say CEO and founder. So what are you doing as a founder? You are making the foundation, isn't it? And that's how you get to where you want to be in the next 5 or 10 years, whatever the case may be. So the benefits are that you will have a business that is accountable, that is financially healthy, that is transparent, a good corporate citizen, because you started on a good foundation. Thank you.
Leya, isn't it also true that, on to what you said, isn't it also true that there could be short and medium-term benefits, especially for SMEs wanting to raise capital, as perhaps investors and financiers would want to see certain the team, the controls, and so on and so forth, since this gives them an added. Maybe speak to that to Gertrude's question.
Yes. I don't think there's anything for me to add to what you have said. Resource mobilization. Whether you're small or big, you need resources, isn't it? And you need to get those resources from an external source, isn't it? Like this young lady needed resources to go for her school. She needed to prove to her parents that she's trustworthy, isn't it? What is it that you're going to do? When you go and get this qualification, what's the plan? Are you going to come back here and just sit around and bake cakes in my house? You know, so there you have to be able to demonstrate, even at your young stage as an entrepreneur, that you can be trusted with this resource and that you will pay it back. How do you do that? Do you just say, I'm going to pay you back? even this young lady had to demonstrate. And as far as the parents were concerned, she had demonstrated responsibility because she was selling things and giving the money back to the parents. That's discipline, isn't it? She was transparent. So she was able to prove her case because she had set a foundation. So it's very important for you to recognize that what you're doing is not a fantasy. Even for what you want now, you must be able to demonstrate that you can pay back or you can grow the business. Thank you. There was a question?
Right, my name is Kola Shadrack. And my question is very straightforward. How do you differentiate between being a business owner and self-employed and an entrepreneur? And at what point can one be recognized or call himself an entrepreneur?
Okay. Very good questions from here. Very mind stimulating. So when you say you're a business owner, you are a shareholder in that company. When you say you're self-employed, who employs? It's the business, isn't it? Is it you as a shareholder who employs? I'm employed by IDC. I'm not employed by Minister of Finance, who is the shareholder of IDC. I'm employed by the person who has capacity to employ. So your business has employed you. That's when you are self-employed. Okay, what was the other issue?
At what point can one be identified or call themselves an entrepreneur?
Okay. At what point? There were a lot of shows of hands when I said, who is an entrepreneur? Can I have those hands again? Now nobody wants to raise their hand. You're an entrepreneur. At what point did you realize that you're an entrepreneur? Are you innovative? Are you innovative?
Yes.
Have you identified gaps in the market or unmet needs?
Yes.
Do you want to make profit? Do you want to grow your business?
Yes.
So you're an entrepreneur. As simple as that. As straightforward as your question. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Samuel Kapasa. You shared a very interesting story concerning your daughter. I think you've somehow answered the question that I'm about to ask when you are, I think, addressing the other question. We personally have grown up in an environment or, let me say, culture where mostly parents get to make decisions for their children based on maybe their love for the children in terms of wanting maybe better future, security, and job and all that. But in your case, it was somehow different in that you saw what your daughter was capable of and the things that she was doing. Then you went forth and supported her with a business, even allocating maybe like a space for her to pursue what she wanted. So I wanted to find out, because you had mentioned, I think in your answer when you were addressing the other question, to say you saw what she was doing, so like she built a proper foundation which allowed you to make that decision. But aside from that, was there maybe like certain things, other things that moved you to be able to go in that direction, aside from just the normal culture that we usually see parents making decisions for their children to say, no, just study medicine and these other things?
Thank you. So the other factor that we took into consideration was what I've just been talking to you about, the fourth industrial revolution. The tenets of this revolution is that now there is more focus on innovation, there is more focus on creativity and agility. And so everything is trying to adapt to these new practices. So, for example, even with the regulation, the way that the regulation is now, mostly or generally in Zambia, doesn't support the fourth industrial revolution, because this revolution advocates what is called agile regulation. Creators don't like too many rules, isn't it? You want to create, you don't want to be told, oh no, you can't come out of here, you can't. You want to explore, but then there is this law. So now the laws are in Zambia very slowly changing, but in other developed countries, the laws are such that they encourage creativity and innovation. And so when we identified that in our daughter, we thought that we should support it because that's where the world is going. And even if we resisted it, it was still going to come back to haunt us. I mean, we've heard a lot of stories. There are some people that have obliged what the parents wanted. They go and get a degree. They come home and say, here's the degree because you're the one who wanted it. Can I now pursue what I really want to do? So it's recognition of the times. Just like parenting has changed. Even career, how somebody chooses their career has changed. Thank you. Okay, there are a number of hands up. So we'll start with the lady.
Yes, good morning, ma'am. And my name is Petra Sindakwela. So my question is, as an entrepreneur, you are supposed to be a risk taker. Then how much risk is too much for an entrepreneur? Or what is the limit of taking risks?
Okay. What business do you do?
So I'm in the fashion industry.
I see.
Yes, I do tailoring.
Okay. So how much risk is too much risk? You've got no business, huh? Very little business. People are coming in, trickling in, and then you go and buy a whole warehouse of materials. What's the risk there? That your money will be stuck in the materials. So you might want to spread your money, maybe use some money for marketing and things like that. So depending on the risk, there's what is called risk identification, risk measurement, whether you're going to accept a risk, whether you're going to avoid it or mitigate it. Remember, the issue is about taking risks. So entrepreneurs will take risks, but they must be calculated risks. There mustn't be too much risk. But how do you do this? Is you go back to your plan. Remember, where do I want to be? What do I have? How am I going to get there? Then the excesses will show. Because you get that warehouse of materials and then you have no money for thread. And then you don't have a market because you haven't studied the market properly. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you. There were some hands. Another.
And the question I have is, when you started your presentation, you defined corporate governance according to the Cadbury report. Now my question is, at what point do small medium enterprises know when to apply the corporate governance principles? Because one of the requirements is that the CEO of a company should not go on to be chair of a sale. So at what point can a small medium enterprise know when to apply that? And are there any requirements or penalties for not following corporate governance principles? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with the last part of your question, where you said, are there any penalties? Remember, I had spoken about mandatory regulation, isn't it? The one in the law. You contravene the law, there's censure. But then there's also self-regulation. So it really depends. Then there's voluntary regulation. So you don't get penalized by the people who made the King's Code for not following their code, but you might have your own internal processes. So when you speak about the CEO not being chair of the board, that could be in relation to corporate governance best practice, isn't it? What does it mean when you say best practice? It's not mandatory. But for you to achieve success, the people who have made this code think that you should govern yourselves in this way. So it's best practice that you have a separation, but it doesn't mean that you cannot have a CEO who is also the chair. They are what are called executive chairpersons of boards. What does that mean? It means that person is also involved in the day-to-day operations because it's an executive. So it really depends. In America, that is very common, where the CEO is also the chairperson of the board. And, they've done business and nothing has broken. So it really just depends on what is your regulatory framework. Thank you. Next question.
So Leya, I think that would, just for time purposes, we'll take that as the last question. Yeah. So
Thank you.
Keep on roll.
Thank you very much. Thank you.